That moment when I realized that I was a victim of emotional, psychological trauma, that it was actual abuse that I went through, that was a whole nother emasculating feeling. Men are not the abused. Men are the abusers. That's what I saw. That's what I always heard. It was very, very humiliating.
The impact of emotional abuse is devastating. It can trickle down generations. It can stunt growth and development. It can have devastating effects.
You're listening to Amplify America, where we highlight social issues, the people affected by them, and the people working to find solutions to our nation's most persistent problems. I'm your host, April Yvonne Garrett. On this first episode, I explore emotional and psychological abuse in Maryland. According to Sherry Gordon, emotional and psychological abuse is a way to control another person by using emotions to criticize, embarrass, shame, blame, or otherwise manipulate another person. A relationship is abusive when there is a consistent pattern of harsh words and bullying behaviors that undermine someone's mental health. This hostile pattern of behavior causes long-term damage, and victims often experience depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, suicidal ideation, low self-esteem, and difficulty trusting others. It can also cause a number of physical health problems, including stomach ulcers, heart palpitations, eating disorders, and insomnia. Emotional and psychological abuse is one of the hardest forms of abuse to recognize, as it can be subtle and insidious, or overt and manipulative. Signs of this type of abuse include humiliation, control, withholding, isolation, invalidation, stalking, emotional blackmail, creating chaos, setting unrealistic expectations, denying access to money or basic resources, demeaning someone in public, deliberately making someone feel diminished or embarrassed, undermining someone's confidence or sense of worth, and convincing someone they are crazy, or gaslighting. It can happen in intimate relationships involving partners, children, elders, and other family members, in friendships, in the workplace, and in the larger society at the core of how institutions are structured and operate to suppress the agency of targeted populations who do not conform. The National Coalition Against Domestic Violence cites 48.4% of women and 48.8% of men have experienced at least one psychologically aggressive behavior by an intimate partner. 4 in 10 women and 4 in 10 men have experienced at least one form of coercive control by an intimate partner in their lifetime. In this episode, we examine emotional and psychological abuse in the context of an intimate partner relationship.
My name is Jason Micah Covington, and I'm now serving as the worship and production director at Next Level Church.
How did you meet the person who became your emotional and psychological abuser?
We met in college, and ultimately, because we spent so much time together, feelings started to manifest, and then we decided to be exclusive, and we were inseparable. If you saw her, you saw me. If you saw me, you saw her. I graduated from college at 21. We got married the very next year. We would have gotten married in college had it not been for some mentors like, hey, just you need to slow down a little bit.
When did things begin to change between the two of you?
I could almost tell you to the date where a switch kind of flipped. We started dating in the fall of 2002. And I remember making a comment right before Valentine's Day about like, we don't never argue. Everything is sweet. It's copacetic. And right after Valentine's Day, we hit a wall. We weren't clicking. It started becoming different. A lot of my friends started noticing the mannerisms, the conversation, the arguments that happen in public that should have happened behind closed doors. The reactions when I want to do something and they didn't want to do the same thing I wanted to do. I remember even on my wedding day, my father was like, hey, if you don't want to do this, I'll pack you up in your 95 Civic and I'll give you all the money you paid and I'll drive you back home myself. And at the moment, I thought he was being facetious, kind of joking. He was like, I'm serious because what are you going to do when the love isn't enough? And I never really understood that comment until I was in it, like 3-4 years in it. And I was like, I don't think I love this person. I felt extremely, for lack of a better word, scared to go down that separation road and ultimately what led to divorce.
Can you recall the first incident where it occurred to you that she was really abusive?
At a mutual friend's house. I think we were playing cards or something. And it was a couple, because we hung out with other couples. And she got upset about something. I don't know if I joked about something that rubbed her the wrong way, but she was like, I'm out. And when we went to that person's house, we were in my car. And she got up, got her stuff, and started walking to the door. And everybody thought she was playing. And she got in the car, and she went outside. And my man was like, yeah, I don't think she playing. I think she about to leave. So I went outside, and I'm trying to talk to her. She got in the car, and she sped off. But in speeding off, she almost hit me with the car. Not head on, but ran over my feet and stuff. For me, in that moment, I tried to laugh it off because, number one, I was embarrassed. Number two, I was like, what did I do? What did I say? We never, even with that incident, we never were able to, when things came up, get to the root of why these things manifested themselves.
It is often difficult to detect emotional abuse and very easy to excuse it by minimizing the behavior. The best way to discern this pattern of abuse is to stop and think about how the perpetrator makes you feel. Did you see a progression in the abuse?
The slightest disagreement turned venomous, and the things that we shared in private that would hurt one another, it happened in public a lot. It was countless instances where people were like, hey, dude, you shouldn't let her talk to you like that. Or like, you need to stand up for yourself. And I'm just like, hey, man, this, she had a bad day. She had a rough day at work or X, Y, Z, or, I said something I shouldn't have said. They were like, but at the end of the day, you never really ever tried to hurt her or embarrass her. But like when she say certain things to you, she going for the jugular. And as a man, you got to be able to not come back and be aggressive or be abusive, but hey, don't talk to me like that. And I never felt like I could do that. I never really ever had the words to be able to speak into that, to stop those behaviors. I always created a storyline that painted this happened because this happened with her, and never really talked about the conversations or what really led to those disagreements or those verbal onslaughts. I now know I can't be a fixer or help people change, because people gonna change because they want to. But in the moment, I just wanted to help her.
What did peace look like, and how long did it last?
It was always those come to Jesus moments where, whether it's both sides, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna do this again. It's that honeymoon, that paradise phase for a few weeks, maybe a month, maybe two if we lucky. But it was never where you can say, oh, I'm good. It was like, you sit on the edge of the chair like, today? So while it was never really good, it was just okay. And having to navigate, like always having to be on your toes to make sure that you don't say something, that you don't do something. It was being in love with the potential of what a long-term great stint would be like. If we can just capture this small victory and then make it work for like a year, I think we can make it. But as soon as you get to a certain point, you get knocked back down. It's just like, how many times I'm gonna get gut punched? How many times you gonna go through those emotions, that carousel, where as soon as you get to something that looks like this again, you're right back to she not talking to you. Or when she is talking to you, she talking to you crazy. She hollering at you. It was just bad.
What tactics did you use to maintain the peace?
Buy her stuff. Give her whatever she want. When we almost got to the end, I bought her a car. And then we started looking for a brand new house. And one of my guys was like, dude, are you crazy? Y'all not even good. And you about to spend $200,000-$300,000 on a house? Like, is something chemically wrong with you mentally? Like, what are you thinking? I'm just like, yo, it's going to be okay. My coping mechanism was to buy her love, because her love language was gifts. So if I can get these diamonds, or if I can get this purse, this bag, like, we're going to be good. If you get mad, I'm going to buy you this. Because if I buy you this, you're not going to be mad no more. Because that was part of that cycle too. It just felt like a hamster on a hamster wheel.
When emotional and psychological abuse is severe, the wounds appear as worthlessness and self-loathing. The victim may also pull back from relationships and isolate. What did the toxicity of your relationship cost you? And in what areas of your life?
It was draining. It was really draining because I never could really be who I was unapologetically. Naturally, I'm a goofy dude. I love wrestling. I know it's not real, but I love that. I love being the life of the party. But if I did something that was corny to her, she would clown me, and not in a place where it's like, ha. It was like, you low-key stupid. They made sure I knew that I was the target of their venom, but everybody else was great. They would have conversations with everybody else and make them feel like $100,000. But me, like, nah. Like, you're not even worth that copper that's on that penny right there. If I could avoid that, I did. I was almost like a puppy. People were like, that's not who he is. But I would rather be something I wasn't to get through to the next day. Mentally. I was a punching bag for her or punching bag for somebody else saying, you could do better, or you don't have to stand for this. It was always a constant feeling of influx. Never able to really sit and enjoy a moment, because I never know if this moment is going to turn a different way. I didn't hang around certain family members because I knew that she didn't really care for them. But it was some family members I was estranged from for years. And it wasn't just until recently we had conversations and had some reconciliation and some healing that went into it for us. And another situation where professionally I was somewhere and a situation happened and they was like, wait, if this happened between y'all two, how can we trust you to manage this system or manage these people? There were some opportunities I missed out on because of that relationship, 100%.
Where did you get the idea that this was at least normal or okay?
Because I felt like everybody had their cross to bear, and this is just my cross. This was just a thing that I had to deal with, because even the guys I was hanging around with, they had their vices. And I'm like, who am I to not have something that I got to deal with? Who am I to not have a situation that we have to work out? I think I normalized that behavior because I saw other people going through things. So I thought this is just what we had to deal with. As crazy as it's going to sound, I just thought that's how people dealt with those kind of situations.
I really think that that's the hardest part for people to understand when they see somebody they love in an emotionally and psychologically abusive relationship, because they're always like, you could just leave. But they don't understand the part of, you chose this person, you love this person, and regardless to the levels of disrespect you're experiencing over and over again, the reason why you chose them is also the reason why you stay. So can you explain, even after going through this personally and publicly and professionally, and the cost it had to you, what that felt like, even in your moment of highest frustration within that relationship? What did it feel like for you to be on the side of still being like, I still love this person, and I still want to try, and I still believe, and I still want them to be better, and I can do something about that?
In the good times, when they were good, I'm not going to front. They were great. But when they were bad, it was hell on earth. Going back to the day I got married, my dad was like, what are you going to do when the love isn't enough? I was so in love with the potential of who she was. I was so in love with the potential, rather, of who we could become. I was so in love with the potential of us being married 50, 60 years, having kids, having grandkids, having a house, that I lost track of the work. I lost track of the daily maintenance that had to happen. For those who say, just leave. Yes, I could. But one thing I can't ever get back is time. I can make as much money as I want, but time, and because we were together for so long, I was like, I can't abandon this because I got 5, 6, 7 years invested. Regardless of how you feel about the person who is perpetrating that form of abuse or those feelings, there was something that brought you to them. I'd be lying to you if I told you I didn't love her. And I didn't care because I loved her and I cared about her deeply. And I was there in the moments where she felt low. And I'm like, I can't leave her. And I felt like it was reciprocated. I think that's the biggest thing. I just didn't want to do that whole abandonment thing to her again. I didn't want to be the source of proving her right. Well, just like he left, you're going to do the same thing. When it was good, it was good. So what can we do to capture these good moments? When you're not in that person's shoes, it's easy to tell them how to walk. But try to put on these Timbs and walk a few moments in my life, and then you see the glimpse of what the glory could look like. I want to stay here for that manifestation. I want to stay here to see that come to fruition. But it's just like, at what point do you understand that they can still be great and not be great with you? That's hurtful because you invested this time, you invested your resources, you invested what it took to get here. And now you're going to say you're walking away?
At Jason's breaking point, he experienced 2 episodes that precipitated the end of his relationship. The first was an alienation of affection, or classic withholding, and the second was physical violence.
What about what happened made you stop and think, this is probably the worst end of this that I've experienced?
We were going through a stint of not connecting, and she made a comment about, you need to make sure you always take care of yourself because I'm not bothering with you. And like, I didn't understand what that meant. So after we left the house, we talked about it, and she was like, I don't want to be intimate with you anymore. I was just like, wait, because I was taken back a little bit when that comment happened. I started seeing behaviors that lend to that statement she made. And you go back to the constant embarrassing things that she would say in front of people. I think it was when one of her girlfriends called me on the phone and was like, look, you can do better than this. I'm not saying you need to leave, but you can do better than this. And this was one of her good girlfriends. And that kind of was like, wait, all right, let's figure this thing out. It was more towards the latter part when I knew I was done anyway, when it escalated and got physical. We were going through our separation, and she blocked me from leaving the home. I'm like, look, I just need you to move out my way. Like, we can talk about this another time. It's late. Just let me go. And I turned around to do something, and when I turned back around, she 2-pieced me in my face. She jabbed in it and came across 2 hits in my face. I'm just like, wait, nah. Like, cause you can't come back from that. We can come back from words. We can come back from mistreatment. But as a female, once you put your hands on me, because I'm raised as you can't hit a female. That's off limits. So there's nothing left for us to talk about.
Ongoing emotional and psychological abuse erodes a victim's sense of self so much they can no longer see themselves realistically. Plagued by low self-esteem, self-doubt, and self-sabotage, Jason started to withdraw from others and let himself go.
When did you start checking out and think this has to end?
This may sound real cheesy, but the self-worth. When I started to denigrate myself before it happened. And I was just like, this can't be life. It can't be life where I am mistreating myself.
What did that mistreatment of yourself look like?
Self-sabotage. When opportunities will come up, I will automatically disqualify myself. Being withdrawn, and it was noticeable that I was absent. Being around my parents and my family and hanging out, everybody laughing, everybody like playing, and I'm just sitting there, a shell of myself. When I started seeing that, and my brother's talking to me like, hey, is everything okay? You're not talking no more. You're not grooming yourself like you normally would. Just not really caring about the way I look. All those things for me showed me.
How did you feel when you finally decided you needed to leave? Did someone in particular help you make that decision?
When I decided to leave, it was a very, very traumatic and scary experience because on so many different levels, from an economical standpoint, You go from 2 incomes to 1. Professionally, what I did in church, people didn't get divorced. So now I'm about to lead and serve in ministry, and I'm going through a public divorce. The emotional draining of being separated from the person that you love for a number of years. Yes, it was coming to an end. Yeah, we're going through the divorce process, but I'm not callous. I still care about you. I still care. I was still getting her oil change and her car serviced throughout our divorce. But when things came to an end, what really shocked me to start getting the help was a mentor come to me and say, hey, you a shell of who you were, and you're going to drown. He said, I love you. I don't want to see this happen for you. You need to do this or you're not going to make it.
That conversation with Jason's mentor was a turning point. It was not an easy one, however, as it made him confront some of the most frightening, dark, and self-loathing thoughts that were the result of his severe abuse.
When he said that maybe a couple of days prior to, I'd never been suicidal, never tried to take my life. I don't advocate for none of that. But full transparency, I remember sitting in my car and laying my seat back and was like, God, I don't want to wake up. I don't want to kill myself, but I just don't want to wake up. The voices were so loud. That's why I always tried to make sure I was around things. I had music going in the car, but when I would get home and it was just me, like it was just so loud.
What were those voices saying to you, and who was it behind those voices?
The voices I was hearing was me saying, you're a failure. You say that you were going to stick this thing out to the end, and you quit. You decided to leave. You can make this work. You just don't have the guts to go back and fight for it. Me being a very prideful person, that was hurtful to hear the inner workings of my soul saying those things. Because everybody around me was supportive. But the inside, I was just like, nah, why are you being soft? You need to man up and go back and figure this thing out. When I sat back in my car that day, and again, we're going through the divorce at this point, and I was just like, I don't want to wake up. That was my prayer. I said, God, I don't want to kill myself. I don't want to harm myself. I just don't want to wake up. I think life for everybody else would be better if I wasn't here. And then a couple of days later, I was having that conversation with my mentor, and I know it had to be a God thing where he started walking me through certain things. I was like, I got to figure this thing out.
And then Jason began therapy.
And then from there, I started going to one-on-one therapy sessions. I was doing 2 a week. I was doing Christian counseling. I was doing the homework assignments that they had me to do. One of the homework assignments were to go to Busch Gardens by myself. I just never did that by myself. The first time I did it, I was miserable because I'm seeing all these couples. I'm seeing all these families. I'm seeing everybody just enjoying themselves. And I'm getting on a roller coaster. Hey, how many you got? I was just one. That was miserable the first time. We processed that in therapy. What were the feelings you had? It was like inadequacy. And they were like, what's inadequate? And I'm like, me. And when I made that statement in that session, and then we started to unpack what that really meant, this didn't start in the marriage. It started in childhood. It started with me not being enough as a child. There was a lot of sessions where Kleenex, I should have some stock in that because it was a lot of times I was crying. A lot of times I went home and I had to kind of get myself together. But about the third or fourth time I did the exercise, going by myself, I felt good. Go to restaurants, hang out by myself. I had movie dates every Friday where it was just a consistent thing I did until I was enough.
Therapy was helping, but when Jason discovered that what he experienced in his marriage was emotional and psychological abuse, that realization leveled him.
In those times when you have to confront what feels like the self-betrayal of being like, oh my God, I allowed this to happen. Oh my God, I let these unworthy thoughts be a part of my being. I really would like you to talk about the moment you realized you were in a situation where you experienced psychological and emotional abuse. Talk about when it hit you, what it felt like, and then how you had to get out of the hole and recover from that.
When I found out that it was actual abuse that I went through, that was a whole nother emasculating feeling. Men are not the abused. Typically, men are the abusers. That's what I saw. That's what I always heard. That moment when I realized that I was a victim of emotional, psychological trauma, it was very, very humiliating. It was very, very denigrating, because now you're just not dealing with the assaults and the onslaught of not being enough. Now I felt like there was a label put on me. I felt like people were looking at me and pointing at me. You got abused, you a dude, man up. And wow, having to sit in that and conceptualize what that meant, it was a blow to an already fragile ego. Because remember, I'm rebuilding, I'm reframing, I'm getting back to who I am. And now I'm also at a place where I'm feeling good. So now to see that this strong Black man was actually abused in that situation, that was another humiliating experience that I had to walk through. So when I felt good about who I was, I didn't realize that I did the psychological and the emotional, verbal, and ultimately the physical abuse. It was back to step one. And to know that this happened, and now I had to take ownership of something. I allowed this to happen for so long without getting the help, because the resources were there. I just didn't do the work. Having to take ownership for my part of it. Because again, I should have left, I could have left. But when you're in it, it's hard to do that. I had to get past that victim blaming stage. What did I do to cause this? No, this is what she chose to do. It's not your fault. And it's easy to tell somebody that, but for somebody to have to understand that you didn't go through that because something you did. It was deficiency on someone else. And now you have to go about taking ownership and rebuilding yourself. Because if you don't, I'm going to perpetuate that same cycle.
Through therapy, Jason realized that emotional and psychological abuse can happen to anybody.
To know that this isn't a gender thing. This can happen to anybody. It was a lot of work. It was years, about 3-4 years of intense work. Once I came to grips with that, I was able to really begin that healing process. It was a lot of work. It was years, about 3-4 years of intense work.
What was the hardest part of the work?
The hardest part of the work is, for me, facing me. Looking in the mirror every day and doing those homework assignments where you writing down positive annotations of who you are and repeating them out loud until you really truly, sincerely believe that you are more than enough. You are worth something. You are extremely gifted and talented Black man. You have value, to the place where I don't need to read that anymore. It's ingrained in who I am as a person. It seems weird to do this because that's not who I am, but having to realize, yes, this is who you are. Now get up, figure it out, and keep moving. Just having to face me, being honest with yourself of who you are in that moment and what you have to do to get back to who God intended for you to be.
What was the best part of the work?
The best part of the work is really loving yourself. Lord forbid, if everybody in my circle decide to walk away from me, I'll be okay. I'll be hurt. My feelings be hurt because I love y'all, but I'll be fine. I'll be able to still do who I am, fulfill the calling I feel that God has on my life, knowing that I don't have to abort anything that I'm working on. I can see things through to the end because I'm good. I think that is, for me, the best part of this outcome, knowing I'm good. Regardless of who come, who go, I'm good.
You are now happily remarried. How did you approach your current relationship differently? And how do you navigate the impact of your previous relationship with the partner who was emotionally and psychologically abusive in this new relationship?
Well, full transparency, I didn't want to get married again. I wasn't looking for her. I was cool with being a perpetual bachelor and just really getting to my profession. What really helped me in this new relationship I'm in with my wife is that I wanted to be her friend first. I didn't want sex. I definitely didn't want to marry her. I just wanted to be her friend. I wanted to really get to know who she was. Once I found out who she was, I'm like, this is a vibe. I'm loving this. I'm loving the friendship. As we start to talk We had a lot in common. She went through some of the same things I went through with her ex-husband. We found a lot of solace in our shared experiences. That previous relationship showed me what was non-negotiable. I established clear boundaries from the beginning. When I decided I wanted her to be my wife, I sat in that moment and said, if she doesn't mature, if she doesn't change at all from this moment, like this moment right here, am I going to be okay? And I could say in that moment that I'm okay. That's what helped me to know this is not only someone you could marry, but actually spend the rest of your life with. I didn't marry her for her potential. I married her for who she was right now. And every day I got a reminder on my phone that comes up and says, I love you more today than I did yesterday. That is truly how it is for us. We have a set of rules for ourselves. Number one, we don't yell at one another. Number two, if we have a disagreement, if we can't solve it within the 24 hours before we go to bed, we at least get to a place where we good. There's never a time where I don't like her. I love her always, but there's never a time where I don't like her. There's never a time where I can picture myself doing life with someone else. Life without Michelle would be a vapor for me. She adds so much to who I am, and she allows me to be 100% of who I am without question. Makes me a better man. I can go on for 2-3 hours and tell you the reasons why I married Michelle. It's just not because of the love alone. The smile that's come back to my face. I feel like my countenance has even gotten brighter. And no knock to my former wife. I pray blessings for her. I wish no ill will to her, but it's night and day. And I think a lot of it is because of maturity, but you can't pay me to trade my life for 10 years, 15 years ago. This is the best season of my life that I've ever had. It's the best.
You are listening to Amplify America with April Yvonne Garrett. Support Amplify America by becoming a monthly patron at patron.podbean.com/Amplify America, or making a one-time donation via Cash App or Venmo by searching Amplify America. For more information, please visit amplifyamerica.com. Navigating recovery from emotional and psychological abuse can be challenging. Mental health advocate Dr. Keita Carter talks about the impact this type of abuse can have and how to navigate therapy from intake to successful healing.
I'm Dr. Keita Carter, and I am the owner and CEO of the Institute for Healing, which is based in Owings Mills. I'm a trained clinical psychologist. I'm licensed in the state of Maryland as a psychologist and also as a clinical professional counselor supervisor.
What is the impact of emotional and psychological abuse?
The impact of emotional abuse is devastating for people. It can trickle down generations. It can impact people in ways that you can't foresee, like suicide, homicide, physical self-harm. There can be internal emotional self-harm. Exposing someone that you love to emotional and psychological abuse can create a completely different person. It can stunt growth and development. It can have devastating effects. Consider how you engage people. If it's possible that the way you engage people could be unhealthy, then work on changing those behaviors. And that work may include therapy. It can include your religious practices. It can include talking with people who've been in recovery from those same behaviors. You can attack the problem many different ways, but start the attack.
What regional factors shape how emotional and psychological abuse is experienced by Marylanders?
What you see in Baltimore is very similar to other urban areas, Chicago, Philadelphia. What we see more often than not is that there are certain holidays where we see more abuse in intimate partnerships. Those days are around New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and the Super Bowl. So if you think about it, it makes sense because those days include lots of drinking for many people. We see abuse across the board, from physical to emotional and psychological, happening on those days a lot more than other days.
With what frequency do you see these types of clients in your practice?
We see a ton of patients who have histories or currently experiencing abuse, including emotional abuse and psychological abuse from parents, other siblings, and extended family members. And as you age, if you get into romantic relationships, we see that happening at the dating level, the engaged level, and then, of course, the married level. Even after a divorce, we see there are still times when we see partners engaging in emotional abuse because they still have contact with each other.
Has the pandemic exacerbated this?
What we found out about the pandemic is that if you are stuck inside with someone, love is not enough. You need to like someone. Many couples have love for each other, but they don't actually like each other. They don't enjoy the same things. They don't like to spend time together. And being in a pandemic, you were forced to do that because the outside was shut down. When you're working from home, you're eating at home, you're celebrating at home, you're on Zoom, everything you're doing at home, the space becomes really small very quickly.
Many people who experience emotional and psychological abuse were exposed to limiting beliefs about themselves at an early age. Those beliefs influence the choices they make in life. The depth of those beliefs are most pronounced in the unhealthy relationships they create with others. One of the things that I think about when I think of all of this is how difficult it is for someone to really face the original sin. The first person that told you something about yourself, that you were unworthy, that you weren't pretty, that you weren't smart, that compared you to your dad because they had a bad relationship with them and they berated you for whatever it was. That first person, that first experience where they used you as a punching bag for whatever reason, that is the thing that codified itself in your brain and in your body that you were always responding to. When people start to consider, am I somebody who has been the victim of emotional psychological abuse? What is it that they're finally coming to grips with? What are they finally being like, okay, I need to go see somebody because this track keeps running in my brain and it keeps showing up in the physical manifestations of what I'm experiencing. I know that I have more control than this, but I can't quite get to it.
The relationships that we have with our parents teach us how to relate to everyone else forever. When you are 0 to 2, you are in a phase where you're completely dependent upon the person who is caring for you. And for many people, that's a parent. And you are developing trust. And the parent represents not just trust in self. Your mother and father represent not just trust in them for you, that the world is safe, because your mother and your father are your world when you're 0 to 2. There is no one else. Then as you grow, that world gets larger and larger. But at the beginning, the people who are raising you, it doesn't have to be a biological parent, but the people who are consistently there for you to provide you with food and clothing and shelter, most importantly, cuddles and nurturing. Those people are teaching you what to expect, what to accept, and what to look for in friends and partners.
The repetition of unhealthy behaviors create patterns. Sometimes people notice these patterns. Other times, loved ones and friends bring these patterns to their attention. Hopefully, this acknowledgement emboldens people to seek the assistance of a therapist. What brings people to therapy?
Sometimes they notice the pattern. I keep dating the same man. One's taller than the other, one's rounder than the other, one's lighter than the other, but it's the same man. Or I am attracted to the same type of girl. So they notice the pattern themselves. And that's really great because that means there's a level of insight that a person has. Sometimes someone says to them, have you ever noticed she's just like her? Seems like they're almost the same. We get the feedback from our environment, and that means we have people who love us and are looking at us from an external view and saying, okay, this seems a little odd. Another thing that brings people to therapy is the notion that they're tired of going around in a circle and ending up in the same place. So they want to know what's going on. How is this continuing to happen? It could be just a really bad relationship. What therapy does is help you uncover those patterns.
I wanted to talk to you about the intake process, because I think one of the things that complicates this is people who are in crisis find it quite difficult to seek help. There are hurdles for them. Some of those hurdles are their presuppositions about therapy in itself, would be that culturally, or I don't need it, or it's spiritually. There are a ton of limiting beliefs that come up with that. What advice would you give to people who are like, I know I need to do this, I'm petrified. There are lots of reasons why I'm petrified. For people who are trying to make that first step, what advice would you give them?
One thing I would say is that you're not alone. The research shows that people will suffer with social anxiety for 10 years before they come to treatment. I want you to put 10 years in the context of your life. A decade of your life is spent struggling and thinking there may be help there, but I'm just not willing to take that step. 10 years is a long time. It's a long time. So you're not alone. Many, many people are scared of making this step. We have anywhere from 30 to 40 people a week requesting treatment. So one of the things that we've done is we've made it easier for prospective patients to approach us by creating an online form. The online form is for many people a way to dump what's happening for you without having to say it out loud, because sometimes saying it out loud makes it real. That form asks them some questions, but it also just gives them an open text box for them to describe why you need to be in treatment. It ranges from one word, depression, to paragraphs. I'm really scared to even do this. People will literally write, I've been working on this form for weeks. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing this. Maybe I shouldn't do this. It's almost in some ways a journal entry. So I've seen that be really helpful. They can also call and request a new appointment. It's always hard to make that phone call. If you make the phone call, then you are essentially extending your hand, and then it's our job to connect with you. I would say make the phone call and we'll help with the rest. You don't need to do anything, just show up. One of the things I want to see happening in our field, and we are moving towards it, is make it easier for people to start, because that start can take a decade.
And then there's the cost.
There are lots of people who would like to seek help, but they are concerned about the cost.
Yeah.
Once they get through it and they fill out that paragraph or that sentence or that word and they connect with you, sometimes it's like, I can't afford that, or it's too much. What kind of advice do you have for folks who are facing the financial limitations of accessing this? Are there alternatives they should be considering?
There are providers who take insurance. Public insurance providers and carriers include mental health services. Private insurance companies cover mental health treatment. If you are low income or you have no income, all states have a public insurance plan. There are providers who will slide their fees down if they don't take insurance, because they recognize that most people cannot pay $150 to $200 an hour for treatment once a week. There are also providers who will take on a pro bono patient. In psychology, it's a principle of ours that we give back in ways that we can to the community. In Maryland, there is an organization called the Pro Bono Counseling Project. One of their missions is to connect people who are uninsured or underinsured to volunteer clinicians in the community. I'm a volunteer clinician in my community. I take on a free patient at least once a year. You might want to look into pro bono counseling projects in your state, but Maryland definitely has one.
When someone is coming to you for the first time, what is that experience like? How do you assess if you are right to work with them? What will your process be like? And what are the other avenues of care you might suggest?
So, confidentiality. I explain that everything we talk about is a secret, and I don't share anything with anyone here or anyone else anywhere. The only people who talk about you are the people on your treatment team, and right now that's you and me. I always make sure the patient knows that they're on their own treatment team. They get to decide if they want to include another team member, like a spouse, At some point, they get to decide if they want to try medication. They get to make decisions. Nothing's happening to you. Things are happening with you. The only people be talking about you are you and me right now, because it's just us on the team. Depending on what you tell me, I'll make a recommendation to add people to that team. Perhaps a psychiatrist so we can get meds. Perhaps a dentist. Perhaps going to your primary care physician and getting blood work done. I don't know what you're going to tell me, but I'll make recommendations and we'll go from there.
There are things that Dr. Carter must disclose to authorities, but there are also other sensitive matters that she keeps private between her and her client.
Then I talk about the things that I can't keep a secret. Killing yourself or someone else, child abuse, elder abuse, or any type of vulnerable population, neglect or abuse. Typically are children, elders, and the intellectually disabled. People who cannot assert no because they are cared for by others. I can't keep it a secret if you are an abuser or if you were abused. And if you were abused as a child, I also have to report that. Everything else is game. I even give them a list because people can get really concerned about what game means. It's everything else. Past drug use, don't report that. If I did, nobody would be in in addictions treatment. Past illegal behavior, like getting a prostitute, I don't report that. Stealing from your job, I don't report that. That's not my role here. So that ratchets down some of the tension.
And then Dr. Carter asks questions, a lot of questions.
Now at step 2, I ask about what are your current symptoms? Why are you here? What brought you here? This is probably not something that just started. So why now? I ask about educational history, legal history, trauma history, medical, addiction, professional history, relationships, social history, sexual history. I ask a ton of questions, some of which are uncomfortable, some of which are very personal. And then the last thing I do is say, so based on what you're telling me, it looks like we're struggling with some anxiety or some depression. Here's what I think should happen. Here's what I would recommend. And I go through a list of recommendations. Which ones of those should we proceed with now? Sometimes it's, I want to start therapy. I'm a little bit concerned about meds, but I want to start therapy. So we table the recommendation to start meds and we revisit it when the time is right, which could be in 2 weeks, could be in 2 months, could be in 2 years.
For people who remain connected to their emotional and psychological abusers while in therapy, managing those relationships can be difficult. What immediate advice do you give your clients about how to deal with their abusers?
What I do with patients is explore all of the options that are available. Then we start to take options off the table. What we have to do is figure out what are our options. One is to cut someone off. Another one is to set up boundaries and maintain them. How do we do that? How do we say, this is where my boundary stops? How do we maintain that boundary with someone who has historically crossed your boundaries? We go in a process of uncovering what that might look like and how to hold the boundary and what are the consequences when that person crosses that boundary. Sometimes that means I need to retreat. I'm not disowning, I'm not talking, but I do need to pull back from this relationship to get myself healthy. Maybe that is, I want to keep you on text street. I'm going to text you and say good morning. I'll text you and say, how was your day? But I really can't engage in a long conversation with you because that tends to end up in an argument or in hurt feelings. I need to text for a little while and then maybe we'll grow from there. Sometimes it's having the conversation. Hey, I can't engage with you this way. We need to set up a new situation, a new relationship. The way we've been doing it is not working for me. We have to go through that journey of figuring out how to engage people who are hurtful to us, but that looks different for each person.
It sounds like you give several types of assignments so that they can have real world application.
One of the things that I do pretty often is talk about making conscious decisions, that we should try not to make decisions by default. If we're going to make the decision to stay married, I want to have a conscious decision made. I don't want to stay married because we haven't thought about it or we don't know what to do. I want to go on a journey where we discover what are the things I like about being married? What are the things I like about being married to this person? What value do I place on marriage? What value do I place on divorce? What are the benefits and drawbacks to staying married and separating? And then what ultimately do I want to do in this season? That doesn't mean that in 3 months, you might be in a different season and make a completely different decision. My job is to be fiercely protective of my patients. I'm going to support your decision as long as it's in health. I'm going to support your decision to stay married, not stay married, to keep your friend, not keep your friend, whatever you think is going to be the best thing for you. But I do want to make sure that we are not just hosting, that we are making a conscious decision to engage that relationship and how we engage that relationship. That's one of the major things that I do, is not making decisions by default. They ultimately end in a lot of resentment. Okay, I wanted to leave in 1997. All right, it's 2017. Why didn't I leave? I don't remember. I guess I just stayed. I don't want my patients to have the experience of in 5 years, I guess I just stayed. I want them to say, no, I stayed because I was scared of the stigma of divorce, because I wanted to keep my kids in a 2-parent home, and because I didn't think I was financially stable enough to leave. Those are my reasons. Okay. So then how are we going to make this relationship as healthy as possible for you to survive? In 2 years, you could say, my stance on divorce has changed. I don't care about the social stigma because my happiness is more important. Okay, let's figure that out then.
After making great strides in understanding why a person got into an emotionally and psychologically abusive relationship, finding the strength to end one can be challenging.
When one is in therapy, but they're still connected to an abuser or somebody who is still in their cycle of toxicity and trauma, those partings are not always easy. How do they go back into that place and say, I have to end this? But that other person might not be open to that conversation. What a lot of people have to navigate while they're in therapy about emotional abuse is their evolution, but the people that they're attached to who are treating them this way, not having the desire to, and becoming increasingly more toxic, increasingly more hostile. So what do you say to that?
I say all of that is accurate. I can't speak about other cultures, but I live in America. Americans have a very hard time ending with positivity, ending in love, ending in respect, and honoring what we had. We are much more comfortable with the proverbial slam the phone down or slam the door shut. What that creates is a pattern of generations of people who don't know how to end in a healthy way. They don't understand that it's okay to end. It's healthy to end. Some things are seasonal, and that's okay. Ending healthy is just as important as starting healthy. In order for you to end in a healthy way, both parties have to be willing to do that. So when you have one party that wants to do the door slam, the best way for you to end is to say, I'd really like to take a few moments, whether that's meet for coffee, and just talk about where we are, how things are going, what will we do from here on out, what are our plans, how we'll support each other if we're going to. Are we going back to friends? Are we going to associates? Do we still have to work together? Do we still have children? How we'll support each other if we're going to. Are we going back to friends? Are we going to associates? Do we still have to work together? How we'll navigate those things and continue to have those conversations. But there are times when a healthy ending in that way can't be achieved. If you're in a physically dangerous situation, or if you're in an emotionally dangerous situation, we don't want you hanging around to have a conversation. But if you are getting out of a relationship that wasn't as toxic as a physically or emotionally abusive relationship, yes, try to honor the time that you're ending like you honored the ramp up. That being said, we definitely don't want people hanging around just to have a conversation that could ultimately end poorly.
Processing the end of a toxic relationship, though ultimately healthy, is disorienting and heartbreaking. Navigating this specific kind of grief is like navigating a death. In the space of people who have to disconnect from folks who are just not trying to end well, what advice do you give them for the grief process and for restructuring their lives? What kind of coping mechanisms do you ask them to try to employ?
When people are coming out of super toxic relationships and they have abuse histories specifically from that relationship, one of the things we do is go through the grieving process. It is like a death. Just because somebody has been abusive towards you does not mean that you still don't have feelings for that person. And it doesn't mean that the moment that you decided to leave physically is the moment you left emotionally. Sometimes you leave emotionally well before you leave physically. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. You left physically, but emotionally you're still there. So we go through the grieving process and we approach it from a death. It is a death. It is a death. It is an emotional death, even though the person might be walking around. There's an emotional loss for you, so we grieve it.
There is a perception that therapy is a never-ending process. In actuality, it is a relationship that evolves like any other. And sometimes that evolution includes an ending. But with your therapist, that door is never permanently closed.
When you have a client that's like, thank you, but I think our work here might be done, or for now, I just want to take a break. What do you arm them with when they walk out the door?
Well, my first thought is touchdown. My job is to put me out of a job for that patient. That makes room for someone else. When a patient says, you know what, I'm doing much better. I think I want to pull back to every other week or once a month, or I think I want to work on ending. What I suggest is think about that as a process, not as a distinct event. Ending with someone, especially a therapist, can take several weeks because you have a relationship with someone that you've built over time. And you don't want to abruptly stop that because that actually creates dysfunction. Part of the work of therapy is to create healthy endings, to model what a healthy ending would be. So when you break up with that significant other, you don't have the door slam, never talk to again. That's really not the healthiest way to end a relationship. It's healthier to have a conversation where you talk about what's working for you and what you want and how this relationship used to meet those goals and they don't anymore. Maybe it would be best if we are no longer connected in this way, but maybe talk about connecting in different ways. Maybe talk about ending that connection altogether. Everything ends. All relationships end. Even the one we have with ourselves, at some point, it ends. So we don't want to hold on to relationships that are no longer serving their purpose. When therapy is done because you feel comfortable and you feel healthy and stronger, then let's celebrate that. Let's reflect on that over the course of a few sessions. Let's honor the time we spent together and then talk about what things are going to happen. Ultimately, they have my number, so they can always come back. Depending on the problem, I will give them resources like hotlines or community resources, whatever I think would be a good fit. Sometimes I even refer to self-help groups. They could also continue on outside of therapy.
What is the positive impact of your work?
The positive impact of my work is that I get to see people grow and mature in ways that they didn't think they could. When a woman gets healthier, then her partner gets healthier or that relationship ends. I know you know this. When you get to a certain level of health, you have to change your people, places, and things if they are not willing to progress with you. Sometimes I get to see people make really hard decisions about their lives because they're not going back. That's really warming. I get to make the community healthier, one person at a time. There's a ripple effect in the community when we get healthy. I love my job. I am always honored when I get to be a part of somebody's health journey, no matter how long or short.
Up next, Jason Covington and Dr. Keita Carter give advice on how to deal with abusers and how to be compassionate, helpful, and effective bystanders for people dealing with emotional and psychological abuse. Keep up with the issues and people amplifying America by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, following us on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at Amplify America, and by visiting our website at amplifyamerica.com. Relationships with emotional and psychological abusers start with the appearance of being normal and loving at the outset. However, soon after, abusers begin to use manipulative tactics to control their victims. But why? Jason Covington and Dr. Carter share what we should know about abusers and how we should handle them. What do you want people to know about the nature of emotional and psychological abusers?
They're broken people. I did not know that I was going through an abusive relationship at the time. And I don't even think, honestly, if you would call her there and say, hey, did you mean this? Did you mean to do this? She would say no, because she's a great person. A lot of times these people aren't a monster. They're not cruel on purpose. Nothing ever just really happens, but there's a reason why someone responds the way they are. Maybe they didn't have a father, maybe they didn't have a mother, and now they're operating from a deficiency, and because they can't articulate that hurt and that pain, they just perpetrate it on you. And now you're like, why am I getting these gunshot wounds? Why am I being attacked? My personal opinion is a lot of times people do these things and may not even know the reason why they're doing it, because they haven't done the work to see why they're in pain. They just know they're in pain. And because I'm in pain, I want you to feel the same pain. But use your words. I'm struggling with this. And now y'all can walk through this a different way. I don't think at the heart of a lot of abusers, they are terrible people. I just think life happens. And because they haven't dealt with it appropriately, it manifests itself the way it does. By no means do I think any form of abuse is acceptable. I just think they're hurt and misguided people that need some help.
Most abusers have trauma histories. They have their own mental health issues that have been undiagnosed and unidentified for them or others. Some abusers know that they have mental health issues. The abuser is going through their own mental health struggle, and we have to understand that. We do not have to accept that as harm to us. What someone else is going through doesn't mean that I get to be harmed by you because you are not well.
How should abusers be seen, treated, and handled? For those who are trying to live in healthy ways when in the midst of people who have these traits, how should they be navigating them?
We should respond to abusers like people who have been traumatized in some way. We should be treating abusers like we treat anyone else. They need help. Just last week, a patient called and said, I have a problem with other races and I'm being hurtful to people in my family, in particular my two daughters who married outside of my race, and I really want to fix that. So my receptionist asked, do we take this person? Because we certainly can't give him to this therapist or this therapist, because what if he's abusive towards those people? And my response is, well, we can ask him what his preference is, but ultimately abusers and racists get therapy too. We help them change. Therapy's for everybody, access for all. Hopefully abusers can get into treatment. Sometimes it's court ordered and that opens the door. Other times it's the loss of something great, like a job that says, we can't have you here. You've verbally attacked too many people, or the loss of a marriage. Like, I cannot do this anymore. Sometimes that drives people to therapy, but ultimately abusers are people too, and they need help. We have to approach with compassion and empathy. That doesn't mean that they get to gaslight you and they get to abuse you.
Bystanders are often at a loss or clueless about how to navigate relationships with people who are experiencing emotional and psychological abuse. As a survivor, Jason shares how you can comfort and support victims and hold abusers accountable. Dr. Carter addresses how bystanders can be unwittingly reckless, using cultural and religious beliefs that increase guilt, shame, and isolation, rather than providing victims and survivors a safe space to recover and heal. What advice would you give people who are concerned that they have loved ones or friends who are experiencing emotional and psychological abuse?
Have the conversation and be prepared to have that conversation maybe more than once. Be prepared to be pushed away, because oftentimes when people feel threatened, they push you away emotionally. Be prepared to be available when they are ready to come back. That happens frequently where someone is pushed away because the truth is not pretty right now. And then they come back and they say, you were right. And now the friend's like, well, you pushed me away. That's a part of sickness, not being able to hear the details of the sickness. And it's also a part of the sickness to deny. Those things are normal reactions to difficult life circumstances. So be prepared to open your arms back for that friend once they have better insight. What I like to say is, when a friend pushes you away, you can still be their friend, even if they're not yours.
I think if you're a bystander and you do have the courage to speak positively into that person who's being abused, be supportive, especially when they come out of it. We don't need to hear the I told you so. We're not interested and you keep rehearsing and telling us that, well, if it were me, I would have done it this way, or I'm so glad you came out of it because no. That's not what we need. What we need is a safe place for you to be loving. And for those who don't feel confident or feel comfortable in being courageous in these conversations, if you really care about the person that is being abused, find someone that still shares some common ground with the abused individual where you can have an intervention. Because while I think the abused individual will respect you more, you have to be kind and be wise in how you navigate these things. It may be someone else that can speak into it that you couldn't speak that way for. Still have the courage to have that conversation.
What about people who are connected with the abuser, who know that this person is causing harm to others? How would you encourage them to address that person?
You have to be even more strategic in your conversation. I would recommend before you speak to the abuser, you have some kind of conversation with the abused to let them know what's going on. Because that was another thing. I had people intervening on both sides, and sometimes they made it even worse for me when I went back home. Because like, so now you out here running your mouth about me. Wait, I didn't say anything. So it's a whole nother snowball effect. The person who had great intentions, they're home in their bed asleep. We at the house getting lumped up on whether it's verbally or physically. So be very, very strategic. If you are going to intervene, have some solutions for the abused person. Have some avenues. Not just say, hey, you need to stop talking to her like that, or stop talking to him like that. And then you don't have anything for the abused person to have as a resource. Make sure all those bases are covered, where you've given the abused a heads up, and also make sure that the abuser knows, hey, I'm coming to you because this is what I'm seeing. Make it about this conversation between you and I, and not we. So you have to be really sensitive when you're talking to the abuser. You can't just start shooting from the hip, because you can make things a whole lot worse for the abused.
Oftentimes, bystanders unwittingly employ reckless tactics. They use humor and they use shame, and then they distance themselves because what they're witnessing is too much for them to really navigate. How do we make people more aware of those types of behaviors and the costs of those behaviors on people who are really struggling?
Certainly, there are times when we mean the best and we just don't help. One of the things I would do if a friend was going through territory I just had never navigated, I would ask other people who are in no way connected to that friend if they've had experiences with supporting someone going through this. Asking your trusted colleagues or friends how they've been able to help support others is one thing that you can do. Also, when you don't know what to say, you probably should still acknowledge. One of the things that was super hurtful, I've experienced it, but I know a lot of people have experienced it, when there's a loss and that loss is known to your community and your family and no one says anything, can be very, very hard because you feel invisible or unimportant. When I had that experience, I said, after I was strong enough, to my family member, I didn't hear from you. And her response was, I didn't know what to say. And my response was, the next time, could you call and say, I don't know what to say? Because at least there's an acknowledgement that you are with me, that you are going through some pain with me. It's not the same amount, it's not the same pain, but that you know that I'm in pain and you want to walk with me, even if that's being silent.
We seem to have a knee-jerk response where we make things up to create the distance between the horror of our recognition of the experience of someone we know who is being abused in this way, how horrifying that is, and our own personal discomfort. I've seen that not only erode relationships, but thrust people into a deeper shame spiral. Frame for the bystanders how they're either creating opportunities for people to evolve or keeping them further in the hole. Because we're all in these ecosystems and we want to be a part of those ecosystems. People who know they need to be healthier within those ecosystems are sometimes still bouncing off of all of that energy while trying to figure out how to maintain these relationships and also trying to heal themselves and be in better situations.
There are plenty of times when our family and friends can inadvertently increase shame and guilt. It happens often, actually. Sometimes it happens in the form of victim blaming or survivor blaming, where you imply that a person either deserved or could have prevented what's happening if they were just different. What I know is that there are times when survivors can be stuck there. It can actually paralyze them when they get enough feedback from their environment that it's really you. If you were different, then he would be so much different. Or if you were different, she would be a nicer person, less abusive towards you. She wouldn't call names if you did X, Y, and Z. For friends and family, that's the last thing you should do. It can paralyze your loved one. It can also create, as you said, a disconnect between them and you. It can make them feel really unseen and misunderstood. We also see this a lot in religious communities. I'm a part of a religious community. People are not trying to be hurtful. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're saying things like, God never gives you more than you can bear, which sort of implies that God sanctioned this experience that I just had. And when I researched rape survivors, the two latter statements that I made, like God will never put more on you than you can bear, or pray on it, or what did you do? Like God must be really angry at you. What did you do? Depending on your belief system, that might not be what you believe. Or things like, just pray it away. Pray that his spirit will get better. Pray that she will have a softer heart. When I talk to religious communities, I remind them that religion and therapy are not mutually exclusive. We can have God and Jesus and Muhammad and anybody else we want to, and we can also have a therapist. In fact, the Judeo-Christian Bible has evidence of mental illness in it and specific words that are connected with mental illness. Those words and what happened in their Bible, there's a response to that. But that doesn't mean that spirituality is the only tool that you have. There are many therapists who have their own spiritual connections. So they get that you can use science and religion to help yourself through life's problems.
I really appreciate you saying that there are examples of this in the faith tradition you value, because I do think some people may want to use it as an axe, but ultimately when they do that, they don't think that they're doing something bad. And the examples you gave, it's just their beliefs, and their beliefs they've repeated for a long time. They can't frame it any other way because they don't have your professional skill set or experience. That is a really important insight.
Yeah, I'm a deacon in my church. I hear people's sad experiences. People often use me as a sounding board or sometimes a referral source. I want to be clear that people in faith communities are people from the general population. They are flawed people because that's 100% of the population. They have beliefs, those beliefs change, they evolve, you develop, you get healthier, hopefully. But sick people are found everywhere. They're found in every culture. I agree with you. A lot of it is not conscious. They're not saying I'm trying to be manipulative by using Jesus against you or God or anyone else. That's the best way that they think to intervene. And using faith as a whipping board is not helpful. The best way for us to really combat emotional and psychological abuse when it comes to the religious community is for your religious leader to have some therapists on speed dial. One of the things that really hurts this cause is when religious leaders attempt to go down this lane. Now, there are some religious leaders who also have degrees and licenses in the mental health field, so that's different. I've seen religious leaders cause significant harm because they are going down this mental health lane and they're not trained to know what to do when there is a sharp left turn. What I like to say to religious groups when I speak to them is, if you had a toothache, you go to your pastor and you would lay back in his office or her office and you would say, I have a toothache. I assume you have some tools. Let's go. And you would sit back and you'd open your mouth, right? No. You would say, please pray for me. I'm having dental surgery, and you would go to your dentist. And yet we don't do that with mental health. We put our pastors in the position, and sometimes our pastors easily take on those positions, or our rabbis, because they want to be helpful and they are trusted by you. The best work that I've done with pastors is when they call and say, I have a parishioner and I think they might need more help than pastoral counseling. I'd like to get them in to see somebody. Great. You do your thing, I'll do my thing, and together your parishioner can be healthier.
Healing from emotional and psychological abuse begins with the victim making themselves a priority. Taking care of their needs first and disconnecting from pleasing their abuser is key. Jason reflects on what he would do differently, why trying to save an abuser is misguided, and what he would tell anyone trying to figure out how to leave this kind of relationship.
If I could go back in time and talk to myself at 21, I would say, listen to your counsel. Whether you choose to still get married or not, you need to go on this with your eyes wide open and not your nose wide open. You need to go on this not being in love with the potential. If this person is the same person today for the rest of their life, are you okay with that? Because had I asked myself that then, I would of course said no. But I never went into that marriage with that notion. I went into it again, this is going to work because I'm X, Y, and Z to show her that she can trust me. No, if she can't see that she can trust you, even my relationship I have from here on out, if they can't see it from the door, there's no need to pursue it. But if you're going to pursue it and you're going to say, I'm going to commit to this, you're committing to this moment for the rest of your life, not for what can happen tomorrow, what can happen next year. Are you, Jason, willing to commit to this moment right now for the rest of your life? If you can say yes to that with no inhibitions, then go ahead and do it. If you're saying, then have some courageous conversations, have some crucial conversations. And when they come, don't try to explain it away. When they show you who they are, that's who they are. You can't change it. You won't change it. So don't fight it.
I want you to say more about that, because I think there are a lot of people who are in relationships with people that they really love and care about who are traumatized, and their trauma shows up in really toxic and self-defeating behaviors, and also in relationship defeating behaviors. Talk about the savior complex, what it really is, how it really shows up, and what the cost is.
That's a mouthful. I think for those who maybe listen to the situation and see themselves in it, I think you have to, not tomorrow, not the next week, you need today to start doing something to get better, doing something to start the healing process for you. At the end of the day, there's something broken in you. We don't like to hear that. We don't like to face that, but that is the reality of it. Because if you can take yourself out of the situation you're in and be totally objective, and you say, if that was me, I wouldn't stand for that. But you are ultimately standing for it because you're in it. You're living it every day. So number one, try to start doing the work to get better. And also, while you're giving yourself grace to grow, be realistic. If you've been in this thing for 5, 6, 7, I dare say even a year, because after a year, you know what it's going to be. Things don't really change too much after that first year. They're not going to get dramatically better. They're not going to get dramatically worse. They're going to still stay on that keel. You may have some spikes. You may have some dips. So you got to figure out your exit plan. What is your exit strategy? Because a lot of times we don't have that. That's what I struggle with too. I knew at least 3 or 4 years before I ultimately left that I needed to leave, but I didn't have a plan. I didn't know how to achieve that. So start working on something that's tangible, have measurable goals. For me, I had a clock. If things don't change by this date, this year, I'm going to do something different. Once you have that date, don't move it. We move the goalpost. When we get on it and it don't change, you know what? It didn't change because this happened to this person. No, have a monument that's erected in your life that say, if this happens, or when this event, this time happens, and if it hasn't changed, now I'm going to do A, B, and C, and then follow through with it. Again, that may be a lot easier said than done, but in this walk, it's either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. It's no in between. And then once you do it, stay committed to it. because one of the things that prolonged my situation was I kept saying I'm gonna leave. And I left 3 times. And after that first time, she was shook a little bit, but then I came back. So in her mind, it don't have no weight. It doesn't have any validity. So if you say you're going to do something, do what you say you're going to do and don't look back on it. Because ultimately, if you go back on it, you give that power back to that person that is ultimately perpetuating that unfortunate event in your life.
What if there are people who know that they need to leave these situations, but don't have the tools that you have? Before you actually did therapy, you left, but there was something in you that pushed you in that direction, and then therapy gave you more tools. What if folks aren't quite like you and they don't necessarily have people outside of them supporting the decisions? Some people who are in these situations have people that co-sign the viewpoint of their abusers. So it's a lot more difficult for them to shake the positive self-image they need to embrace.
I was beyond sick of being tired. I was beyond that. I sat in that moment by myself, exhausted, and I'm like, I gotta figure something else out. But until I got by myself and was like, Cov, you can do better than this. Really, what are you doing? This statement for me, this is what helped me. If I could be miserable by myself, why am I being miserable with somebody else? Nah. If there's anything I could tell someone that may be walking through this, if they don't have anybody, because the reality of it, you have one person, but you choose not to listen. But if that is your reality, truly, you have no one. Find some space. We all have that space. You may not be able to leave the house. That space may be in the shower. That space may be washing your car. That space may be taking the kids to school and you're driving back by yourself. And here's the thing. Once you start it, it's easier to go ahead and execute. But the hard part is actually starting it. You got to have the courage and you have to have that boldness to start it.
Jason Covington, worship and production director, music engineer, husband to Michelle, father, and emotional and psychological abuse survivor. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And thank you for amplifying America.
Thank you for having me.
At the end of every Amplify America episode, I encourage you to consider a core value, policy imperatives, and volunteer opportunities pertinent to the issue explored. Dr. Keita Carter shares her thoughts on these matters when it comes to emotional and psychological abuse.
When it comes to emotional and psychological abuse, what should be our core value?
We should all want others to be free to be healthy and live without the threat of attack. We should always want that for others, no matter who they are. We should want others to feel safe in their skin and in their surroundings.
What is a policy imperative around emotional and psychological abuse that we should consider? The reason why I'm asking you this is because a lot of people that I talk to about this particular type of abuse said it's so hard to legally codify it and to have a remedy for it or a redress for it. So do you have any thoughts about that?
I was reading a story in a psych magazine about a woman who finally got the nerve to leave her husband after he was both physically and emotionally abusive. She got divorced from him and ended up having to pay him alimony, even after she had proven that was a part of the divorce settlement. There seems to be something odd about that. In some ways, you are rewarding or supporting someone who has consistently failed to support you and your health. From what she said, number one, it made her regret leaving because it put her in a completely different financial situation. And then it made her think, well, could you have stuck it out? Now you're second guessing. Was it really that bad? Is it as bad as this? I went from a house to an apartment. I had to sell my car. I had to take the subway. It made her second guess her decision making. And it made her question right and wrong. I think from a policy perspective, I would love it if a senator took on that role and really made that not possible. That if there is clear evidence of abuse from the hand of anybody, we don't want to pay that person. We don't want to pay that person.
What is the primary volunteer opportunity people can engage?
One of the ways that's really helpful is volunteering on a crisis hotline. You'll get training to do so, and you can be on that receiving end when someone is fleeing a situation or trying to get help or just needs to talk with someone about a recent fight that they had or whatever is the crisis. Connecting with nonprofit organizations who don't do clinical work, asking, when's your next event? How can I volunteer? Whether that's giving out flyers or whether that is connecting people with therapists, working a mental health fair, for example, can be helpful. Connecting with nonprofits who do advocacy work in the community, trust me, the grassroots ones are always looking for more hands because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few.
Dr. Keita Carter, owner of the Institute for Healing, LLC, and Vice President of the Black Mental Health Alliance. Thank you for your mental health advocacy in Maryland and beyond, and thank you for amplifying America.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure.
Now I invite you to explore how this issue hits home where you live. Visit the Engage page on amplifyamerica.com and download the Amplify America social card template. Fill it out and share what meaningful actions you will engage to combat this issue in your community. And tell me about it by posting on social media using the hashtags Amplify America, Amplify Action, and Amplifier. Together, let's amplify America. Amplify America would not be possible without the generosity of our supporters. They are Groundwork donors, Anonymous Cupcake, Dr. Otis Stephen, Hank Torbert, Andrew Chen, and Reverend Dr. Claudia Highbaugh. Kindness donors, Brian Burkert, Mark Fuller, Dr. Walter Kembrough, Crystal Dyer-LaRoche, Clarence K.D. McNair, Jonathan Mannion, Dr. Jennifer Richardson, Cindy Usher, Alyssa Zuliani and John Ashoff, and sustaining donors, Dr. Francis Gourier, Eleanor Jewett, Tyrone Jones, Barbara Kakiris, Judson Kerr, Andre King, Nick Nicholson, Jacob Harrison Orloff, Dr. Anel Prem, Amy Sherald, Dr. Laurie Shanderson, Daniel Joseph Shelton, Wanufi Tashome, Edward and Marjorie Waldman, and Peter Wilson. Amplify America's production intern is the lovely and amazing Kaya Karibi White. Special thanks to Dr. Catherine Masalek, Rachel Ladish, Trudy Weatherall, Dr. Anel Prem, Joseph Youngblood, Eden Lunsford, and Lori Carson for their episode advice. Next on Amplify America, Domestic Violence in Colorado, featuring Ruth Glenn, President and CEO of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Rose Andem, philanthropist, businesswoman, and domestic violence survivor, and Nicole Castile, Program Director for the Rose Andem Center, a place for domestic violence victims to find safety, support, and services needed to rebuild their lives and heal their families.